Hello, travelers. Welcome to the Copper Fox Inn. My name is Thomas the Human Bard, and I am joined today by...
Mercy the Tiefling Wizard.
Onog the Half-Orc Barbarian.
And Bean the Rock Gnome Rogue.
And today...
Sorry, guys. I'm late.
It's all right. Today, we're adventuring into the dungeons of Unearthed Arcana for another Copper Fox Inn Deep Dive.
Whew, this is a deep cave.
Yeah, I think we did lose you at one point.
Yeah. I totally took a wrong turn. Never split the party. That was on me.
Good. It's a good thing we didn't roll for that random encounter. You would have been
Yeah.
toast, buddy. On this episode of the Copper Fox Inn, we'll be covering Unearthed Arcana 2022 Character Origins by Jeremy Crawford with Christopher Perkins and Ray Winninger. Now, normally on this show, we cover Unearthed Arcana for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. But on this episode, we're covering Unearthed Arcana for a completely different game. This Unearthed Arcana is playtest material for one D&D.
The only.
Is that a cult?
Yeah.
Are we joining a cult?
You know how
I think we
went...
did when we started playing
We
the
were
game.
doing, you know, with Xboxes, we went to 360 and then I went to Xbox One.
It's a real
I think that's what they're
Xbox
doing
situation.
With,
yeah.
That's what they're doing with this. We're gonna get and then we'll have D&D XS. And
See, if it was
D&D 1 Series 1.
If it was D&D 1, we could call it D and Done, and I would like that.
Oh, wow.
that'd be fun.
That'd be like, this is the final.
That really locks them in. They can't ever make any more additions after that, though.
It's D&D. I'm surprised they didn't go with D&D Unlimited or D&D Infinity, because that's so in right now.
Well, that could be like something that they're going for,
Yeah.
because originally D&D 5th edition was called D&D Next.
Right.
So they could
it was
be
called
Oh, so
Which
this
for
could be
some
D&D
reasons-
after that one.
For some reason, D&D Next does sound like the small version of D&D that's at the airport. That's like a little bit of like a faster,
Express
the
D&D.
Express.
In this version, you've got 2 dice, a D4 and a D8, and that's all you're gonna get.
There's only
And it's
2
gonna cost
classes.
you
it's going to cost you 3 times as much.
$17 for a glass of water.
So, you might be asking, travelers, what is 1D&D? I mean, good question. It's a little vague. It is the next edition of D&D, except it's not actually. It's also still D&D 5e, we swear, we promise, but also we're doing it new and again and changing it, but it won't be changing, don't worry, but also we're changing it.
Yeah.
Is it just a working title?
Well,
maybe?
explicitly what they have stated, what Wizards of the Coast representatives have stated, is that they are working on the next edition of D&D, but they promise that it is, quote-unquote, backwards compatible with 5th edition. Because
Okay.
I think part of it is that on a fundamental level, Wizards of the Coast, as a company, needs us to keep buying the books. And if we stop buying the books, they can't make D&D anymore. But if they don't update the edition, then we won't keep buying the books forever. They have to keep making new players' handbooks. They have to keep making new monster manuals, new dungeon master guides. But it is also the most popular 5th edition is the most popular version of D&D that has ever existed. It is the single most it is the single most successful version of D&D.
Yeah.
So they don't want to
monetarily.
lose the connection with that.
So they don't want to disenfranchise all the people who just bought all the fifth edition source books and say, well, the things you just spent all that money on are no good anymore. Here's the new version of D&D. So they have to make a new edition of D&D, but then promise that it'll work with 5th edition.
Yeah.
Is this just confusing to people who don't play Animal Crossing New Horizons? Because this is just Happy Home Paradise 2.0. It's almost like a whole nother game inside the game, but they just improved your game that you already have. Nothing to be mad about there. Sounds good to me. Is this just confusing to those fake gamer boys who don't play Animal Crossing?
Yeah,
Do
we're
they have a
not.
hard time understanding how game editions work?
The rest of us aren't real gamers like you, Mercy. Sorry. So,
That's sorry about that.
the document opens with, this document is the first in a series of Unearthed Arcana articles that present material designed for the Player's Handbook coming out in 2024. The material here uses the rules in the 2014 Player's Handbook, except where noted. Providing feedback on this document is one way you can help shape the next generation of D&D.
You can be the next Jeremy Crawford.
You're the D&D now. Inside, you'll find the following content. Character races. These are the race options being considered for the Player's Handbook, all with updated design. Character backgrounds. Here, you'll see the fun role that a character's background is going to play in helping flesh out the character's origin. Starting languages. This section specifies the number of languages a character knows when created. Feats. Every first level feat mentioned herein appears in the Feats section, which contains both new and revised feats. Rules Glossary. In this document, any term followed by an asterisk appears in a glossary at the end. This glossary defines certain rules terms that appear in this document, focusing on terms that have been clarified or redefined, or that don't appear in the 2014 Player's Handbook. So, the order presented there, character races, character background, starting languages, feats, rules glossary, is the order that the document presents those sections in. But it doesn't make much sense to do it that way to me personally, because the feats and the rules glossary are referenced almost immediately without knowing what they are or mean. So what we're going to do on this show is read the document backwards. So I'll begin.
Oh no! He's summoning an eldritch horror!
No, I was talking backwards. No, we'll be beginning with the rules glossary section of the document.
Did you guys ever, when you were younger, did you ever have those like children's read-along books that you could read and there was a tape and it would read along with you and it would tell you what pages to go to? I feel like that's what we're doing with this. We're like, read along in your book.
Read along with us.
Feel free to read along at home.
17, and then when you hear the chimes, we're going to go back to page 4.
I had those books that were like, I think they were Disney branded, where on the page it would show a little logo and you'd push that button to make the sound effect. Those slapped. Those were so sick.
Don't slap your books. It's bad for them.
No, the books themselves slapped.
Oh, no.
So the rules glossary, the first section in our version of the document. That is what we're going to cover on today's episode, the rules glossary. In order to make this podcast somewhat listenable, we're going to break this whole document up into roughly 4 episodes. And this episode we'll be covering the rules glossary, updated rules, and the spell lists. In future episodes, we will cover feats, backgrounds, and character races. Let's begin on page 18 of the document. This has got to be one of the longest Unearthed Arcana they've ever put out. Rules glossary. This glossary includes game terms that have new or revised meaning in these playtest rules, as well as terms such as creature type that aren't defined in the 2014 Player's Handbook. The terms are organized.
It's like we should have put that in there.
It's almost like we should have probably mentioned somewhere what that meant.
That we forgot to define in the Player's Handbook.
The terms are organized alphabetically. If a term doesn't appear here, just use its definition in the 2014 Player's Handbook.
Assuming it has one. Yeah.
We all know that they defined everything in that book. It's fine. You can
That's
find all the
definitely
answers.
why they didn't need to release Xanathar's Guide to Everything to explain more of the rules that should have been in the book.
I immediately looked and I was like, where is the definition of crudité? And that's not in here. It's not in the Player's Handbook. I've been looking everywhere. What does it mean? Nobody knows. It's just vegetables. Arcane Spells. An arcane spell draws on the ambient magic of the multiverse. Bards, sorcerers, warlocks, and wizards harness this magic, as do artificers. For a partial list of arcane spells, see the spell list section later in this document. Now immediately you're like, okay, Yeah, isn't that already a thing? Kinda. Not, I mean, sorta. They reference it in a few places, but it's never a rules term that means anything.
It's something that they designate, but then does not actually mean anything in the mechanics of the game.
So going forward in this document and in the, the playtest as is, the concept is that there are class agnostic spell lists. Because currently in the game, every spell is part of a spell list, like the wizard spell list or the ranger's spell list, or I guess no, the ranger uses the druid's spell list. So that's why it's like a whole deal. It's like you have these.
Well, not all of them.
Yeah,
It's a
you have these
limited
spells
version,
from
yeah.
this spell list. It's a whole complicated. So what they've done is they've organized spells into 3 archetypes: arcane, primal, and
Divine.
divine. Thank
Yep.
you. And those now exist outside of classes. So if they were to print, let's say, a new class, they would not have to start amending every time. Check, like, get your spell from the wizard spell list or the artificer spell list, because the artificer spell list should be an option but didn't exist at first printing. So now they have to go back and add it in all those places they missed it. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't let you add classes very easily. So they've now changed the formatting to be these class neutral spell lists and say artificers just use the arcane spell list, as do bards, sorcerers, warlocks, wizards. And if they were to add a new class, they would not have to create a new omen speaker spell class. They would just say it uses the divine spell list. And that will hopefully make it much more intuitive going forward where your spells are and how they're qualified. I don't think there's currently any rules text that defines them in any other, like arcane spells don't have any unique quality to them other than just being tagged as divine
arcane
or arcane. Yeah.
Hopefully at some point in the future that will mean something, or it'll be like this monster is immune to arcane spells, but divine and primal spells still work.
Which is a cool design space to open up going forward. I like that a lot.
I really, really like this change. That's something that as I've, over the last few years, whenever I was sort of playing around with like, what rules would I want to change for my own sort of table rules? I always wished that the spells were divided up this way, because on the one hand, I think it's obviously a lot smoother from just a writing rules perspective, and it makes you able to add on new things instead of now having to be like, oh, well, we made a new class, I guess it would have, but it feels like it should have these spells from the wizard list and these spells from the warlock list, but how do we even write that in a way that makes sense? And so it feels better just to say, oh, well, if this is a new class that has to do with getting your power from a higher being, then it should be from the divine list, like that tracks. And so it's smoother for writing rules and for adding new stuff, but it also is better for world building, because I know they've talked before about the different classes, the arcane, or I guess now not arcane, the different mage classes basically having to do with gaining your magic or learning your magic in a different method, and then these different lists now correspond to from a different source. And so I like how there's kind of those two different elements stacked on top of each other that can make the different combinations feel more unique. I really like it. I think that even if they don't end up writing a thing about here's why arcane ones are arcane from a made-up sci-fi rules reason, it should be, if they do a good job dividing them up, pretty intuitive, I think. Like, we've all, if you've read and watched enough fantasy, you could probably guess which ones should go on which list. And I think that that's good from a immersion point of view, and it will be easier, I think, for people to make homebrew that feels thematic.
I was just going to say the same thing. It'll be so much easier to make classes, like your own class or your own spells, because then instead of having to go, well, what class does this go along with, you can just be like, it's this type, that just so much easier homebrew wise.
This also kind of resolves a power level disparity that has been in discussion in the community for a long while, is that like wizards just have all the spells. They have so many spells that there are some spells that they don't get, but they just have access to all of the wizard spell list, which is just better than any other arcane caster's spell list. And in particular with the comparison between sorcerers and wizards, is that for some reason there are spells that the wizards have that inexplicably sorcerers do not have access to. And so with this, it's just they're both drawing from the same well, It's literally like they have access to arcane magic, you have access to arcane magic. Now it's a more even playing field between the single most powerful class in the game and everyone else.
Yeah.
Artisans Tools. Artisans Tools are a category of tool with which a character can gain tool proficiency. For a list of Artisans Tools, see the 2014 Player's Handbook, but ignore the prices there. Those tools now cost 15 gold pieces a piece. Great. Yeah. Pretty simple. So that obviously includes, like, mason's tools and all those different things.
So but the important part of this is that they're all equalized to 15 gold pieces. And
right.
You might think, why does that matter? Well, who cares about what gold pieces are? So it matters because tools are often something that classes or backgrounds start with. And in an effort to equalize players' starting footing, they've made it so that all background, like opening, like item packs and such, all end up with the exact same gold value of 50 gold pieces.
Okay.
Because that was a metagame thing that a lot of, like power gamers / optimizers were doing, is they would take whatever background gave them the most expensive artisan
and then
tool
just sell that?
and immediately sell it so they can start the game with more expensive equipment than other players.
Okay, but that
But
doesn't
now-
incentivize as much like role play.
And it doesn't
Yeah, it wasn't for
incentivize-
no role-playing reason,
Right.
just because this one has the most expensive stuff.
So now they all have equally expensive stuff. So that's not a qualifier you need to think about when choosing between them. It can be much more open of why you want to pick one or another.
Incentivizes character choice
Yeah.
more. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Or like if you decide that you want to gain a skill and like buy a toolkit that all like they're all kind of accessible. Man, wouldn't it be great to live in a world where when you're just starting out and you're trying to find your way in the world, wouldn't it be great if the powers that be came down and said, you know what, we're actually going to make this all just as accessible and cost the same forever. Like, man, that would be great.
Wow.
Anyway.
That's crazy.
I can only imagine.
Oh no, what's the next rule?
Next rule is creature type. Every creature in D&D, including every player character, has a special tag in the rules that identifies the type of creature they are. Most player characters are of the humanoid type. Here's a list of the game's creature types in alphabetical order. Aberration, beast, celestial, construct, dragon, elemental, fey, fiend, giant, humanoid, monstrosity, ooze, plant, undead, Doug trio. Wait. These types don't have rules themselves.
I think it's just because this is the first time they've ever written them all together.
Well, no, they've written them all together before.
I doubt
But it was for different things.
I press X to doubt. I don't think I've seen that.
But some rules in the game affect creatures of certain types in different ways. For example, the description of Cure Wounds specifies that the spell doesn't benefit a construct. I don't know if this is different than what's written in the player's handbook, except for the fact that Cure Wounds also doesn't affect undead.
Yeah, I think they
So
just
I don't know if
gave
they're
a- I think they
I don't
just-
know if they're retconning that or not in this.
Yeah, I don't know if they just chose one specific example of like it just doesn't affect this one random type as an example. But yeah, these don't exist meaning anything in and of themselves. They only exist in their relationship to other things. But now they're defined going forward. So now we know what it means. It's a tag. Cool, thank you. We have a full list of them, and when it says it on the page, I don't have to guess, like, is there a rule tied to that? Does dragon mean something?
I think actually the thing that would be different from the player's handbook for this is that it says most players are humanoid. Because
Yeah, that's
since
true.
then they have released multiple, I think at least two different races, 2 or 3 different races that are not humanoid. Like autognomes are constructs, and I believe satyrs are explicitly fey and not
Yes.
humanoid.
Yeah.
And that may be something going forward that they'll play with more. All the races presented in this document, which we'll cover in a future episode, are all just humanoid. So at least with the base going forward, they're sticking with all humanoids, but they're leaving the door open for if they want to add a new book of a bunch of new playable races, they might play around with creature type.
And I think it makes sense to have your sort of most basic core races all be humanoid, but then to leave room like they've played around in Unearthed Arcanas over the last while of saying, what if you were just a news?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Bean,
feel-
what's the next
Yeah.
rule?
Okay. D20 Test. The term D20 Test encompasses the 3 main D20 roles of the game. ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws. If something in the game affects D20 tests, it affects all 3 of these rolls. The DM determines whether a D20 test is warranted in any given circumstance. To be warranted, a D20 test must have a target number no less than 5 and no greater than 30.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Let's break this up.
Sure, yeah.
Because these are all talking about very different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we start off here defining the D20 test, a new way to say ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws that isn't just listing all 3 of those things, because they really wrote themselves into a corner when they started listing those, and then they just were now married to listing all 3 every time they ever wanted to reference them. So now it is just D20 test, which is significantly less letters.
And also, like, it's kind of that thing we talked about in the past where it's like they need to establish terminology, what that means, and not deviate from it.
Yeah,
well, and then
absolutely.
it prevents you being the person, like, being in the moment of, like, oh, well, I get advantage. And they're like, no, you get advantage on saving throws, not this. And you're like, well, it doesn't necessarily say saving throws. It just says, like, when I make a check. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Is a saving throw a check? Like, this just, now you can say, on a D20 test, and we know what that means. And if it says on a saving throw, we know it doesn't mean the other 2.
The other points.
And then the bit about, a target no less than 5, no greater than 30, that's basically just spelling out the classic, like, if it's only make your players do a roll, that's more for the DM. That's saying, like, don't make your player roll for something if there isn't realistically a chance of success or realistically a chance of failure. You don't need to roll to open a regular door. You can just do that. So if the target difficulty would be 2, just do it. That's basically what that is saying.
You don't need to roll to open a regular door, but players will probably make a bunch of rolls to open a regular door because that is just how
For
D&D
like 30
works.
minutes, they'll think about how to open the door. Yeah.
I see if the door is trapped.
Yeah.
That's never happened to any of us, right, guys?
Not this weekend.
Recently.
But it is interesting to note that, like, most of the feedback I've been seeing online is that 30 is too small to consider impossible.
Yeah,
From what
a lot of
specifically in
people
the
are talking
higher
about.
tiers of play.
Yes.
Because
I mean-
especially, we've seen in our own campaign, on our own campaigns, bards roll 37 on persuasion.
Repeatedly.
Repeatedly, and almost necessarily in certain points. But it is, I believe, the way that I think giving it a hard and fast number it would be incorrect, but having a general guideline of, like, 30 might be too big for someone to actually do, so don't ask them to do it. 5 might be too small for someone to care about, so don't ask them to do it. But just a general rule of, like, if it's too easy, don't bother them. If it's too hard,
They don't
let
get
them
to roll.
Tell them they failed. You know.
Yeah. I have seen some people talking about how there is a vast difference in how the game is run between on-the-fly DMing of, like, establishing a DC for an activity that was not presupposed, like the players want to do something you didn't plan for.
Just eyeballing a DC and
just
making
eyeballing
it up
DC.
in your head.
And the given DCs in many adventuring campaigns that are officially published by Wizards of the Coast, they'll say things like, to open this door, you must roll a 24 strength check. And it doesn't take any factors into account. It just says that. And those are very different styles of play. And this new kind of concept, especially once we get into the rolling ones and rolling 20s sections of this, it doesn't play as well with the pre-written campaigns version, but it plays really well with the just kind of make it up on the fly version.
Which I think a lot of the recent releases have been geared more towards understanding that that's how a lot of the players play.
I think so. Yeah.
Well, I know when I DM, everything I do is made up on the fly, and for me, a huge amount of, like, the DCs that I pick are actually way more narratively motivated than, like, DC, like, actual DC motivation, and that may not be everyone's style, but sometimes I will tell the players what the DC is, because, like, I'll be like, okay, you have to roll at least a 15 to get this, because sometimes saying the number out loud adds tension, but,
Yeah.
like, maybe somebody says something that's, like, a totally cool idea and is really cool narratively, but is technically would be kind of hard to do, and I'm like, okay, cool, make a roll. And in my head, the DC's actually, I don't tell them the DC because I've actually made it a bit lower, because I'm like, oh, that is actually really rad. And
I hope you
think
do it.
It'd be cool if it happened.
It'd be cool if it happened. So the DC is actually like 10, but I'm not going to say that out loud because it's actually a hard thing to do.
Because if you roll really high, I'll let you think that, like, wow, you barely made it. How intense that just was
Yeah.
retroactively. Yeah.
They'll be like, oh, I want to open this door. And I'm like, oh, okay, getting into this room needs to seem really important. So I am going to tell them that DC for opening this door is actually really difficult because I want to help build the tension of like a moment or, you know, or like their friends trapped on the other side. So the DC for getting them out of there actually needs to be high to like add to the tension. And it's way more narratively motivated on my end.
Hey guys, huddle up real close.
Yes,
okay,
hello?
hey,
What?
I don't want them to hear. Guys, I'm not the only one who's ever asked for a roll and not thought of a DC, and then after they roll, I ask myself, that'll do it. Or I go,
A 14's good enough, right?
Like, I'm not the only one who's done that, right?
That's the most blasphemous thing you've ever said. I cannot believe you would do such a thing.
I was kidding.
That is heretical behavior. Many people on the D&D subreddit have now decided to murder Mercy. Please
Mercy,
don't.
I'm in your boat so much.
Yes,
Mercy.
we have all done it. We're all in your boat. That's the part of it's when the rubber meets the road of DMing. You know what I mean? Like you kind of play it how it lies.
In that same role, I've definitely done this, and I've been in campaign where I've seen the DM doing this, where they ask for a check and we roll like a 9, and then they're like, "Oh, let me give you advantage," and then I roll like a 7, and it's like, "Well, you find it anyways," and it's like, "Well," and this rule is to prevent that from happening, where it's like, "Well, I wanted you to do it, but I also wanted you to feel like you were doing something."
Rolling a 1. If you roll a 1 on the D20, the D20 set the.
That bean just disappeared.
She
I'm back.
rolled a 1 on her performance check.
I rolled a 1 on talking and I failed life. Okay. Rolling a 1. If you roll a 1 on the D20 test automatically fails, regardless of any modifiers to the roll.
Okay.
Now, we were just talking about this as friends earlier, and one of the things that we were talking about.
We're friends?
Well, we're married, Onog, so I would hope that we're
that's
friends.
canon now.
Well, Bean and Onog aren't married, but good friends of them are.
I cast friends on all of you at the start of every podcast.
And that's why you feel so hostile.
Are hostile to me.
Yeah.
But we were talking about this before of like, well, wait a minute, if halflings roll a 1, or like, 'cause, you know, some people have racial or background or class abilities that say things about whether they roll a 1, like take rogues and bards just like taking 10s on things. And we were like, if you roll a 1, but you technically treat everything below a 9 as a 10, does that count? And this says any modifiers to the roll, which in my mind would definitely mean that if you have a racial or class ability, that this wouldn't affect that.
Yeah. Okay. Rolling a 20. If you roll a 20 on the D20, the D20 test automatically succeeds, regardless of any modifiers to the roll. A player character also gains inspiration, with a capital I, when rolling the 20, thanks to the remarkable success. Rolling a 20 doesn't bypass limitations on the test, such as range and line of sight. The 20 bypasses only bonuses and penalties to the roll.
So here's the interesting thing that a lot of people complaining online aren't noticing, because a lot of people have been kind of getting up in arms because of the D20 on any check is an automatic success. And then right here in the second sentence, it says, it doesn't bypass physical limitations of what is possible.
That's a useful clarification for sure, where it's like, yeah, it's not like, well, I rolled a 20 on trying to make that mountain explode. It's like, well, that's just not a thing that you had the option to do. But yeah, that's really helpful. But it also is useful that it's saying that it doesn't bypass class abilities either, only bonuses and penalties. So a class ability that says you always roll this on this, that still happens. It just means that you don't add or subtract. Yeah,
it's like the opposite of the rolling a 1.
Yep.
And it is interesting that the main difference with these two rules is that before it was only attacks 1 automatically miss misses, 20 automatically hits. Now it is skills and saving throws, which is a big one too, because if you have a goblin who cannot possibly pass your saving throw of a level 20 character, suddenly they
have a 5% chance.
They have a 5% chance that they're not going to get hold-personed.
Well, and it helps everyone feel like a hero somewhat. I feel like we've all had that moment where you roll something and you're like, oh, natural 20! And then they're like, well, no, because this isn't an attack. And you're like,
It's so lame, yeah.
Bummer.
Yeah. I love the element of randomness that it adds, like you're saying, Onog, where I love the idea of things that have been encouraged as well before by different members of Wizards of the Coast, of the idea that if that goblin rolls a natural 20, instead of it just being, well, I guess that goblin was really wise or whatever, flavoring it as, oh, but you didn't realize the thing you said is the one thing that he knows isn't true because of the circumstance, where it's more the randomness of chance of the world around you than your skill or that other person's skill. Because I love the idea of rolling ones and 20s as representing natural random luck in the world. I think that's great.
I saw a really good example of that being your monk, who is literally constantly doing backflips and parkour and stuff. When they roll a 1 on an athletics check, they don't just trip and fall on their face because they're an idiot in that 1 second.
Right.
They happen to step on a tile that they couldn't see was loose, and then it fell off of the roof. That's not their fault. The world denied them the success in that moment because of the random chance of reality. A bird flew into their face as they tried to do the cartwheel. That you can't control for that.
I
you know?
love that. I love that.
Yeah. Critical hits. Weapons and unarmed strikes, asterisks, have a special feature for player characters. Critical hits. If a player character rolls a 20 for an attack roll with a weapon or an unarmed strike, the attack is also a critical hit, which means it deals extra damage to the target. You roll the damage dice of the weapon or unarmed strike a second time, and add the second roll as extra damage to the target. For example, a mace deals bludgeoning damage, equal to 1d6 plus your strength modifier. If you score a critical hit with the mace, it instead deals 2d6 plus your strength modifier. If your weapon or unarmed strike has no damage dice, it deals no extra damage on a critical hit.
Okay.
So the big parts of this that really matter, and a lot of people have been up in arms about, is that it says, quote, if a player character rolls. This now effectively means monsters controlled by the DM, NPCs, do not critical hit against players, according to this rule set.
Or anything.
Or anything. They do not roll critical hits. Only players can roll critical hits. So the dragon's bite attack cannot critical against you, even if it rolls a 20. It doesn't do anything different. It also changes a little bit because the second aspect of it is that it is only the weapon damage that is rolled again, no other parts of the damage. So let's say sneak attack. Smite.
Yeah, that is
You would not roll that damage twice, only the weapons damage.
And even a third, even I would argue bigger point for some people anyways, is weapons and unarmed strikes are the only things that crit. So spells that have spell attacks no longer crit as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. And at first, my instinct is also to be like, no, but taking away opportunities for that random chance of rolling a 20 is a bad thing. But listening to Jeremy Crawford address their thought process behind it, I am more inclined to be like, yeah, they may have a point. Like, that may work better overall, because monsters controlled by the DM, when they're a lower level, having them crit can really mess up the balance of the encounter, and at a higher level, they already have abilities that are sort of their version of a crit anyway. They have legendary actions, they have lair actions that recharge, and that's the random super powerful attacks that they get. So it's already there, but a little bit more controlled by the DM. And with spells, I don't remember if he addressed this specifically, but as someone who's played a lot of casters, that's fair.
He was a little condescending on this one. He was a little condescending of like, well, you're not missing much. And it's like, Yeah, but it's the principle of the thing, man.
I
like
kind of-
you are actively taking away functionality.
Yeah.
In this, and that's the real feels bad about this. If this had been the rules from the beginning, obviously no one would be batting an eye at this. But it's the idea that something exists and is being taken away. That's basically what the only thing in this paragraph is, that it's taking away features from the game.
Yeah.
As opposed to changing or like being nuanced. Now, I don't mind the idea that only weapons can crit. I do kind of I think that the spellcasters need something to replace it. I don't think that just giving crits to martial classes is the answer. I think like maybe on like a fireball they reintroduce I know this is in like Pathfinder and stuff like that. They reintroduce that if you critically fail on a saving throw to a spell, you take max damage, not just you take you
that's
don't
interesting.
you don't dodge the attack. Is the attack against you is as though every dice rolled max damage. Now, once again, that kind of comes back around to the NPCs can't crit discussion, and I think honestly that could be a really interesting alternative rule for DMs to use, as opposed to a hard and fast rule. Because like, sure, if your party's like, I would say like an interesting rule would be like, if your party's level 1 through 5, enemies can't crit against them. It's just one of the things.
But once you hit 5, you welcome to hell.
Yeah, well, welcome to the gauntlet. You're going to get smacked, you know. Because I absolutely agree, and as we've all played in D&D, we've all played a campaign of D&D before where I punched an old lady down 2 flights of stairs because the helmed horror got a double crit or whatever, and killed a level 1 wizard because that's just how much damage they did on a crit, and they instantly killed them in 1 hit, and that didn't feel good, and we kind of stopped playing that campaign because it immediately kind of derailed what everyone kind of wanted to do. And I think this is a good, they have good reasons for what they're doing. I just think it needs to cook a little longer.
Yeah, I agree that I think that the idea of having NPCs crit is actually, in my opinion, I think that is better as the alternative rule than the other way around. I think having this be the base rule of they don't crit does keep it more balanced, and having an alternative rule, if you want to, you can have them crit.
Ooh, sort of like a gritty realism.
Yeah, saying that like, well, that's gonna throw, if you want a little more randomness, a little less balance, sure, let them crit, but I think this is actually a little bit better as the baseline. And I think another thing to consider, and why I do agree that I think also having spells crit doesn't actually work that well, is because spells are so inconsistent in terms of which of them do I make an attack roll on or not. Because a lot of damage dealing spells, I don't make an attack roll, but then with some of them I do. And so it adds this really imbalanced element to it, where it's like now suddenly a spell feels better or worse because there's a very slim chance that maybe I could crit with it, but that's not really very reliable. And I don't like the inconsistency of that. And I feel like in the same way that a NPC monster might have a legendary action or a lair action that kind of works as their crit, I feel like upcasting is kind of that for me, where I can say, if I want this to be my big dramatic moment, I'm just going to burn my 6th level spell slot and have this go off really big. So I actually am more in favor of this.
Interesting. Yeah. I think it's going to be a divisive one amongst the community. I'm going to sum up the next 2 just because we've already basically covered them, and we'll move on past them. Divine Spells. A divine spell draws on the power of gods in the outer planes. Clerics and paladins harness this magic. For a partial list of divine spells, see the spell list section later in the document. It's the same as Arcane Spells. It is just establishing it as a type of spell now. And Gaming Set, much like the tool set earlier. Gaming sets are a category of tool with which a character can gain tool proficiency. For a list of gaming sets, see the 2014 Player's Handbook, but ignore the prices there. Those sets now cost 1 gold piece a piece. Mercy?
It's an expensive set of dice. Jeez.
Yeah. Grappled condition. While you are grappled, you experience the following effects. Speed 0. Your speed is 0 and cannot change. Attacks affected. You have disadvantage on attack rolls against any target other than the grappler. Movable, the grappler can drag or carry you, but the grappler suffers the slowed condition while moving unless you are tiny or 2 or more sizes smaller than the grappler. Escape. While grappled, you can make a dexterity or strength saving throw against the grapple's escape DC at the end of each of your turns, ending the condition on yourself on a success. The condition also ends if the grappler is incapacitated or if something moves you outside the grappler's range without using your speed.
Okay.
Okay, that's very different.
Yeah.
But not it's one of those things like we were talking about before where it's like it's not that different, but in very key moments it is incredibly different.
Yeah.
One of the things immediately is that it references the slowed condition, which we have not talked about yet. But it basically is just they only have like half speed, essentially. So it introduces that for the grappler. They can't move their full speed while grappling you. Which is how the rules were working before, yeah. Yeah. But now it's codified it with a specific condition. And it now provides a constant, like, escape DC, which some grapples had and some grapples didn't in the game. And now... Yeah, most monster grapples had, like, this is the hard and fast DC to escape this grapple. Whereas player character grapples and or non-stat blocked grapples you have to roll athletics or acrobatics to avoid it, and they have to roll athletics to grapple you. Does this change? I mean, this references the grappler, and then you, the grappled one, the grapplee, if you will. Is that, is the grappler also considered grappled? No.
No, absolutely not. No. Because then they wouldn't be able to move you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so I'm wondering, was that always true? I assume that when you grappled a person, you both were basically grappled by each other at that point.
No, that is something that you could do in response to someone grappling you, is grapple them back, then you both have no movement.
There is a big difference of being in a headlock versus giving someone a headlock.
Yeah.
Also, can you grapple someone who is grappling someone else? Can you make a grapple chain?
You can make a conga line, yeah.
A conga line?
That's a perfectly acceptable way to play the game.
I don't know why you ever would want to, but yes, you can.
But
it's allowable.
Perfectly acceptable.
We play D&D very different ways, Thomas.
That was always allowed. Other than that, I'm not sure the finer points of what this actually adjusts.
The big thing, as the resident barbarian, the big thing this changes is the grapplee, if you will, gets to make a non-contested check at the end of their turn, irrelevant of their actions. Before, they had to make a grapple check as an action against you. So they basically had to give up their turn to try and get out of the grapple, and then it was still versus you rolling a dice against them. So
it's no longer a contest.
It's no longer a contest. Now it's a hard DC set by your strength modifier, I'm presuming, and your proficiency bonus, which, especially for people who took the skill expert feat or have expertise in athletics, that's actually lower than what it would be if I was just making a straight check against them. If there was a contested check as opposed to a DC. So what this fundamentally does is that you don't have to worry about what you're doing on your turn. At the end of each of your turns, you get a chance to get out of the grapple. So this basically weakens grappling for the grappler and bolsters your ability to escape by the grapplee.
Interesting. Do you think that's something Grapple needed to get like a nerf to get out of it easier, to make it worse?
Honestly,
was grappling too strong?
Grappling has always been kind of a weird thing in 5th edition because since 3.5, which was the last time I tried to grapple someone, and I quickly learned my lesson and never did it again until 5th edition, grappling was a very complicated set. You had to, like, to even initiate a grapple, you had to make at least 3 separate and distinct rolls that were based on different stats from each other and stuff like that. And then when they came out in 5th edition of just being like, roll your athletics versus their whatever they want. And then if your number bigger, you grab them. If your number smaller, you didn't. Too bad, sorry. It smoothed it out so much. There are a bunch of weird corner cases that like don't follow how like real life physics works a lot of the time with the way 5th edition handles grappling. But I don't really feel like, and this is coming from the guy who builds his characters to maximize their ability to grapple other people. So this is a little biased. I don't feel like there was a problem with like at least the way that players can grapple other characters, be they NPCs or player characters. But what this does is it's because one of the problems, at least from the defensive point of view of being grappled, is that if the other guy had such a high grapple check that he grappled you in the first place, the chances of you getting out of it by wasting your action to try and do it is catastrophic. It's like, unless he just happened to get lucky the first time, you're probably not getting out of the grapple and wasting your action the whole time doing it. So it is a very feels bad on that side of things. As someone who's also been grappled as a DM and watching their wonderful monstrosities get pinned down by a dwarf barbarian, unable to escape because the dwarf barbarian just has advantage on all athletics checks. It's just like, oh, my thing's now caught in this hairy maw, and I cannot escape. Goodbye, that creature, you know. So this evens the playing field for people who are being grappled versus people who are grappling. And I don't know, honestly, this doesn't make me angry. I could take it either way.
This feels to me like something that will really show itself as being good or bad through like heavy playtesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll notice it only after a bunch of sessions of trying. If you built a barbarian to specifically try and grapple and do it a bunch with these rules, you'll start noticing does it feel better or worse, how it ends up stacking out, how it changes encounters.
Yeah, you'll always have somebody in a grapple, the way these rules work, at least for one turn, which is like a lot of like hold person spells.
True.
Or stuff like that, where it's like if it goes off, if they fail that first save, then we'll have at least one turn, and then at the end of their turn they get to make a check. So I think it's trying to even the playing field with those kinds of spells. But I honestly don't know if this is better or if it even is that important,
well,
at least that aspect of it.
A spell is special because you can do it from far away. To grapple someone, you have to get them.
You have to be real friendly.
That's the disadvantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move on to the next one, Onog.
Sure. Incapacitated. Condition. While you are incapacitated, you experience the following effects, or you don't experience them, but they are happening to you. Inactive. You cannot take actions or reactions. No concentration. Your concentration is broken. Speechless. You cannot speak. Surprised. You are incapacitated when you roll. If you are incapacitated when you roll initiative, you have disadvantage on the roll.
So previously, incapacitated was just the first one. You can't take actions or reactions. The rest are all now new additions to what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Was your concentration not automatically broken?
Nope.
No, I think that was a thing of that was a feature of unconscious.
No, so it didn't say that you lose concentration under the incapacitated rule in 5e, but it does say under the concentration rules in 5e that you lose it if you are incapacitated.
Cool. So it's just an oversight.
So you
one
did
of the
lose
good
it.
old-fashioned, you need to read 3 sections of the book to understand one functionality of a single thing. Gotcha.
So if somebody said, wait, does incapacitated make me lose concentration? And I look up incapacitated instead of
and
concentration, I'm going to get the wrong answer. Well, that's good. They've added it to make it more clear exactly what incapacitated does.
Well, and especially too, I think this is the first time in 5th edition history where they've kind of addressed what happens when I roll initiative while I'm taking a nap.
Yeah, true.
Because
if you're
it's like,
long
if I'm
rested-
asleep,
Yeah.
yeah, if I'm asleep, do I roll initiative? Do I not roll initiative? And this says, if you're incapacitated, you roll initiative, but you have disadvantage because you sleepy.
Would you argue you're incapacitated while you
I
you're
would.
asleep?
I definitely
think so.
qualify for all
Yeah.
of the effects of incapacitated.
I think lots of people talk while they're asleep. I think lots of people concentrate.
There's a
It's actually very
difference.
true.
I think there's a difference between talking and speaking.
Okay, new feat idea. You can cut this if you want, but new feat idea.
Hooves.
No, hooves. No, new feat idea. Sleep talking. You can speak while incapacitated. That's the only feature of the
Oh,
feat.
I thought you were going to
But-
say new
Very
feat idea,
useful
sleep
for a
talking.
spellcaster.
But it cannot
you-
make sense.
I was going to say that you can cast spells while you're asleep, but you randomly pick
But
which spell it is.
You
You have to
randomly
roll
pick
on a
which spell
table.
or target.
Because you just talk in your sleep and cast a spell.
You roll on the wild magic table if you talk in your sleep
Oh,
as a
no.
caster.
If you have vivid enough nightmares as a wizard, can you accidentally talk in your sleep and cast fireball like while asleep? Yikes! This is bad.
I definitely punched Onog in my sleep while I was dreaming, so I can imagine that would happen.
That's fair. Well, overall, it seems to be just a bit of an adjustment to how it's presenting incapacitated. Not too much of a big
More
change.
clarifying.
To it. More
But
clarifying.
a very important codification
Yeah.
and clarification, where it's like, we have these words, they mean this. This is what's happening.
Definitely.
As opposed to what was before of just like, I don't know, just figure it out.
Just figure out which of these
Well,
five
there are
synonyms to use.
There are rules. It's like a puzzle for you to find them.
But put them all in the same place if they have to do with the same thing.
Batman. I've hidden the rules to 5e in 12 vans all throughout Gotham City. All right.
Yes, when you're incapacitated, you still have concentration. No, no, no.
Wrong.
Wrong.
All right, Bean. What's the next one?
Sorry. I'm so sorry. That was very good.
Oh my god.
That was a very good
Guys,
The Batman
Oh look,
callback.
I just got an inspiration die. I made Onog laugh. This never happens. Okay, speaking of inspiration. Inspiration. When you have inspiration, you can expend it to give yourself advantage on a D20 test. You must decide to do so before rolling the die. Gaining inspiration. The main way a character gains inspiration is by rolling a d20 for a d20 test. The DM can also award inspiration to a character who's done something that is particularly heroic or amusing, such as making Onog laugh.
I did see
Only
one person point out online where they were like, honestly, I don't know if there's a good reason to keep it that you have to decide before you roll, because I have never, ever, ever seen someone remember that they have inspiration until after they've rolled.
That's
which,
fair.
you know,
Well,
true.
this is definitely a shift in design space. Let's finish talking. Let's finish the paragraphs here, and then we'll really get into this. I think there's interesting stuff to cover.
Only one at a time. You can never have more than one instance of inspiration. Now, this is like capital I inspiration, not bardic
Not
inspiration.
bardic, yes.
If something gives you inspiration and you already have it, you can give inspiration to a player character in your group who lacks it. Oh.
Yeah.
Losing inspiration. If you still have inspiration when you start a long rest, you lose that inspiration.
Nobody, no, don't talk to me until I've had my inspiration coffee.
Oh, don't
does-
talk.
That's so good though, because it does like encourage people to do big things and
Yeah.
encourage, you know, it's like do something big because you have inspiration. You got to spend it by the end of the day. So do something risky because you
So-
can just give yourself advantage.
Talking about it in that interview with Jeremy Crawford, and kind of what you were just talking about, Mercy. They want inspiration previously was arbitrarily handed out by the DM on their whims, and no one ever remembered they had it, and almost no one ever used it, and it just was a feature of D&D that was kind of forgotten on the wayside. This is attempting to really mainstream it into actual play of D&D and how D&D functions.
Like it actually has gamified rules of
Yeah.
how you gain inspiration, which was not the case.
And it wants to create a system in which inspiration is less of a health potion or a revive potion where you keep it till the very end of the video game because you never know, you might need it later, and you never use it. And more of, look, it's going to go away at the end of the day anyway. Just use it when you have it. You'll get it again anytime you roll a 20. So it's supposed to be something you are constantly churning through. So throughout the day, you might use inspiration 3 or 4 different times on different rolls because you rolled a 20 or someone else rolled a 20 and they already had it and they gave it to you to use later. Or an important thing that we'll talk about later in the races, according to these rules, humans' racial ability is that they wake up every day with inspiration already. Mm-hmm. So if your party has 1 human in it, they'll have inspiration. And if they roll a d20 and they hit a 20 and they have a critical success, now someone else has an inspiration. And if either of them roll a d20 and hit a 20, now they can give it to a third person. And hopefully your party will be full of inspiration and constantly kind of going through it because by the end of the day, it goes away anyway.
Right.
Yep.
I like this system. Honestly,
I think it's really good. It encourages people to do big things and to make big decisions and really play in character.
It is one of those things where also, like, people keep forgetting because they have to use it before the roll. There are 2 kinds of rerolls that you get in the game more often than not. One of them is you have to use it before the roll, and one of them is you get to see the roll, and then you can decide to use the ability after seeing the roll.
But before you find out if you've
But before
succeeded.
you find out if you succeeded
And generally,
or not.
you must use the second one.
Generally. However, one of these things is not like the other, as they say. One of the fighting styles is protection. And it allows you to, before someone has made an attack against someone next to you, you can use your reaction to intercede and give them disadvantage. However, from a number crunching statistical point of view, this fighting style doesn't really do anything because or it feels bad to use because if you use your reaction to intercede and give them disadvantage and they rolled a 1 on both of them, they were going to miss anyways, so you wasted your ability. And if they roll real high on both of them, they were going to hit anyways, so you wasted your ability. Things like that. So it's actually kind of a weird corner case that making the decision before the roll is made is actually beneficial, and that's why people don't use it. People almost, as far as I've seen in the game, people almost never use abilities that require you to use them before a roll, because using them after the roll is so much more like it is like you have that ace up your sleeve. If you're playing poker and you just put an ace in your hand, sometimes that doesn't help. But if you're playing poker and you get to see your hand and know when the ace is going to be helpful, that turns things so much more in your favor. Now, numbers wise, this might make it too good from Jeremy Crawford's standpoint, but I would argue, especially because of how special they want inspiration to quote unquote be, I would argue that you should be able to use it after you've made a roll, but before you know if you succeeded or not. So you can kind of vibe how you want to do it, and that will make sure people stop forgetting that they have it.
Well, from a hero
fair.
vibes perspective, you get to go, wait, I have inspiration.
Yeah, because if you do, wait, I have inspiration, it's too late for me to use it. Never feels good. That
late.
never
That's
feels
fair.
good.
That's fair.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think there's an interesting element of design that this hooks into, whereas if it's like, oh, you can roll after you've seen the roll or whatever, this specifically functions to grant you advantage on the roll before you've rolled it, which mechanically can tie into certain class or subclass abilities, i.e., let's say a random example, rogue sneak attack.
That's true.
You can only get sneak attack if you have
If you have advantage.
And you can now just choose, if you have inspiration, to give it to yourself for no reason whenever you want, as long as you have inspiration. Whereas saying, like, if you see a roll you don't like, you can try again. I don't know if they would mechanically create that as
Want to say
give
that is
yourself
advantage.
advantage. And I don't know how much they're going to use advantage as a mechanical lock-in key for certain
Sure,
subclass
yeah.
or class abilities. Because this lets you now, going forward, if you have a subclass ability that only activates on advantage, now having inspiration really matters, because it means I can make that subclass ability go off whenever I feel
That's
like.
a good point, yeah.
I
think
don't
that's a
need
good
to
point.
rely on the other party members. I can do it myself.
Yeah. I can force this. The classic rogue asks the DM, do I have inspiration or do I have advantage? And the DM goes, why would you?
Because I said
Because
so.
I asked nicely.
I'm cool.
Yeah.
Well, because isn't he technically helping me?
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's move on. It's me. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Long rest. A long rest is a period of extended downtime, at least 8 hours long, during which a creature sleeps for at least 6 hours and performs no more than 2 hours of light activity, such as reading, talking, eating, or standing watch. Benefits of the rest. At the end of a long rest, a creature regains all lost hit points. The creature also regains spent hit dice, up to half of the creature's total number of them, round down, minimum of 1 die. A creature can't benefit from more than 1 long rest in a 24-hour period, and a creature must have at least 1 hit point at the start of the rest to gain its benefits. Interrupting the rest. If a long rest is interrupted by combat or by 1 hour of walking, casting spells, or similar activity, the rest confers no benefit and must be restarted. However, if the rest was at least 1 hour long before the interruption, the creature gains the benefits of a short rest.
One thing that I was wondering about this, so it says that you lose inspiration when you start a long rest. If you start a long rest that is interrupted, do you still have that inspiration?
No, because it's when you start it.
But does it, so it still counts as having started a long rest even if you didn't get a long rest?
Even if you didn't finish the long rest, you started it.
If you lay down in your cot with the intention of long resting, you are starting a long rest.
You are officially, quote, starting a long rest.
Okay.
And then you would lose the inspiration. Yeah.
All I heard is that it's got to be at least 6 hours, so I don't want to hear any more crap from you guys. When I only get 6 hours of sleep, I'll be like, that counts as a long rest.
But on that joke though, that is a very important distinction because that was something that was not in 5th edition rules. Can people even take long rests and stand watch at the same time? Because it says, at least unless you're an elf, you have to be unconscious for those 8 hours, supposedly. You have to be resting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like so many times we've split it into 2 watch shifts, and that's just so not enough time.
Yeah, that's not...
Yeah. There are new, the new elf addresses something about how much it needs to long rest and all that. We'll cover that more in the race episode. But it does clarify for non-elf characters exactly how much time you can afford to do something like stand watch, which helps you to know which part of the night you're going to need to prioritize to which character, that kind of thing, which is useful. And it also does, previously, you did not necessarily gain the benefits of a short rest because rests previously in original flavor 5th edition were like, if you had started a long rest, if you declared you were starting a long rest, you could not declare you were starting a short rest, so you could only pick one of them.
Right.
But now it says, hey, if you were asleep for an hour,
That's
a short rest. You did
yeah,
it. So you can still
that has
use
more
your hit
verisimilitude
dice.
to it as well.
You can still get your short rest abilities back, that kind of thing, if you get, like ambushed in the night or something.
Right.
So, but on that point though, because you only heal after completing a long rest, can you, when your long rest is interrupted and combat is started, say, well, during my short rest, I used my hit dice?
Good
Can you
question.
say after the fact, or do you have to like preemptively use your own hit dice on something you think you're going to get back anyways?
Well, do you have to use your hit dice at the start of a short rest? Let's see. A character can spend 1 or more hit dice at the end of a short rest.
Okay.
So
rules is written, if you were
probably.
interrupted, you could do it.
The
likely.
bandits show up, and you wake up, and they're in the DM's like, oh, because you're down, and you're like, no, because technically I finished a short rest. I'm gonna
Adrenaline.
roll my hit dice really quick.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
you probably could.
You flavor that as you stand up from being ambushed in the night, and you're just like, 1 second, and you rub some Vicks Vapo rub on your chest. Okay, I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say load your biceps like shotguns like Henry Cavill in Mission Impossible, but that works too.
Or you just have those pants at the end of your bed, and you jump into them.
You jump in them 2 legs at a time.
Yeah.
All right, the next 2 are, yet again, covering the same thing we've covered before. Musical instruments are a category of tool with which a character can gain tool proficiency. For a list of musical instruments, see the 2014 Player's Handbook. Ignore the prices there. Those instruments now cost 20 gold pieces apiece.
I would argue as a former band kid, some instruments were not created financially equal.
Valid.
but that's
Oh no, we live in a special society where all starting equipment
a
is
wooden
affordable.
drum with a piece of leather strapped over it is not the same cost as a cello.
My starting instrument is a tuba.
Primal Spells. A primal spell draws on the forces of nature and the inner planes. Druids and rangers harness this magic. For a partial list of primal spells, see the spell list section later in this document. Yet again, a spell distinction, like the other two.
Slowed condition. While you are slowed, you experience the following effects. Limited movement. You must spend 1 extra foot of movement for every foot you move using your speed, which is a weird way of saying doubled, like
Yeah, but it
halved.
matters because it doesn't multiply.
Yeah.
It actually is a very important
Yeah.
distinction.
You spend 1 extra foot for every
Yes.
foot.
Yes.
Why is that not?
Because it makes
Well,
it,
because
makes
it
it
isn't-
additive instead of multiplicative.
Multiplicative.
Because if you
Well,
had
but
two
why not just say-
instances that's both said double,
Oh, I
it
see.
would double the
I see.
double
For-
instead of just adding one more.
In
foot.
terms of stacking. Okay,
Yes.
yeah, that is
we can get
useful.
into
That is
we
useful.
can get into this after.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Attacks affected. Attack rolls against you have advantage. Dexterity saves affected. You have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. That makes sense to me. Tool
Well,
proficiency.
nope,
Oh,
that's
oh,
it.
Oh, sorry.
So to answer your question, Mercy, what is different now is before it said when you were grappling someone, it said your movement, your total movement speed is cut in half. So what that meant mechanically is that, for instance, if I grapple Bean, I can take her 15 feet because my movement speed is 30, and then I can drop her, and then because I let go. Even though the reason my movement speed is halved is because she's slowing me down, if I let go, my movement speed is quote unquote no longer halved, and I have 15 feet of movement left theoretically. And so that there was this weird disjoint in physics on how they work. And also, if my movement speed is cut in half, and I'm walking on difficult terrain, and there's the ground spike spell or whatever it's called, like all of those things add and or multiply. Which things are they multiplying? Which things is getting cut in half?
Yeah.
Becomes very complicated to try and deal with. But
Definitely,
just saying,
yeah.
you spend 1 extra foot for every foot. Right now it's doubled, but if it's difficult terrain, then it's also different. Then that's much easier to handle than this is cut in half, but this is doubled. Tool proficiency. If you have proficiency with a tool, you can add your proficiency bonus to any ability check you make that uses that tool. If you have proficiency in the skill that's also used with that check, you gain advantage on the check too. This functionally means you can benefit from both skill proficiency and tool proficiency on the same ability check. That opens up a lot of worms, but is basically a clarification from Xanathar's Guide to Everything that they added that isn't in the original handbook.
Because there were some implications of how tools would affect a check, but some of them were even considered as optional rules. This actually clarifies what exactly tool proficiency can help me with when I am making a check.
And so it's interesting to note then, because it says if you have proficiency in the skill that's also used with that check. It's not if there is a skill used in another skill and used in that check you have happen to have proficiency in. It says that is used. So it is implying that every time you are using a tool, there is also a skill check happening. And if you're proficient in both of them, you have advantage. But if you're only proficient in one, you just have normal proficiency. That's how I'm interpreting this.
Yep.
And that opens up a big old door of like, so if I'm smithing, what is the skill proficiency being tested? Is it athletics? Yep. If I'm, if I'm using sleight of hand, or not if I'm using sleight of hand, if I'm using thieves' tools, is it sleight of hand? Is it stealth? What's going on here?
Yeah.
This seems more complicated to me than just letting the proficiency bonuses stack.
I mean, that would be more mechanically beneficial, but also that has its own can of worms too, because like we said before, you can get expertise, which is stacking proficiencies.
Right.
In skills. So then what happens if I'm
Stacking on
proficient in
stacking.
Smith's tools, but I have expertise in athletics. Do I get triple proficiency? That's bonkers.
Now it just would grant you advantage.
Right. Which I get that
Yeah.
that's better, but it's so much more straightforward to understand from a rules
For sure.
perspective than if you
That's
now
very
also
fair.
have advantage. Like this to me feels a little convoluted.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's them trying to find a way to have the party members gain benefits from having
Right.
multiple otherwise conflicting proficiencies without straight up just taking it away.
Yeah.
Bean, you're up.
Tremorsense. Tremorsense. A creature with Tremorsense can pinpoint the location of creatures and moving objects within a specific range, provided that the creature with Tremorsense and anything it's detecting are both in contact with the same surface, such as the ground, a wall, or a ceiling, or the same liquid. Tremorsense can't detect creatures or objects in the air, and Tremorsense doesn't count as a form of sight.
Oh, that's interesting.
A very
That has
important
messed up-
clarification.
That's messed up a lot of spells right there.
Yeah.
Huh.
Spells that require sight.
Oh,
you
yeah.
can't use Tremorsense to cast them.
Interesting. Okay.
The reason
Because
that
at first I was just like, oh yeah, okay. Oh.
the reason they've clarified what Tremorsense is and refined it is because in this document, in the race section, which we'll cover in a future episode, all dwarves have Tremorsense while touching stone.
So good.
So if they're touching a cave wall or a building wall that are made of stone, they gain Tremorsense up to, I think it's like 60 feet or something like that. But very cool, very flavorful. But this now clarifies and refines exactly how that benefits you and in what ways it doesn't benefit you. You don't see, you can't use it to count for spells that need line of sight, that kind of thing. But it gives you some limitations on exactly what you can see, how you can see it, all that.
Guess I'll
And it
just
makes sense-
start my Daredevil subclass build from scratch. Crumples that piece of paper.
Dang it. Let's end the final rules clarification here. Unarmed strikes. An unarmed strike is a melee strike that involves you using your body to damage, grapple, or shove a target within your reach. Your bonus to hit with an unarmed strike equals your strength modifier plus your proficiency bonus. On a hit, your unarmed strike causes one of the following effects of your choice. Damage. The target takes bludgeoning damage equal to 1 plus your strength modifier. Notably, based on that, if a random character is making an unarmed strike, because it uses no dice in the damage roll, it cannot critical hit.
Yep.
Because monks get to roll dice on their unarmed strikes, they'll still get to critical hit on theirs, but the rest of you no longer get to critical hit on punching somebody
And
at the bar.
honestly, if you did, it would have added 1 damage.
It doesn't
have fun.
It doesn't. Yeah. Grapple. The target is grappled, and the grapple's escape DC equals 8 plus your strength modifier plus your proficiency bonus. That answers a question from earlier of what that DC is going to be. This grapple is possible only if the target is no more than 1 size larger than you, and if you have a hand free to grab the target. And finally, shove. You either push the target 5 feet away or knock the target prone. This shove is possible only if the target is no more than 1 size larger than you. So, you might ask, what does this change? Why does this matter? These were already things I could do. So these are all now subcategories of unarmed strikes, whereas previously they were characterized as special attack actions.
That you could, no matter what kind of an attack action you were able to take.
It was just when
Could
you
do.
hit with an attack action, you can choose to make a special attack action like shoving or grappling. Now, if you want to grapple someone, the only way is to make an unarmed strike against them and then succeed on the whole thing. You know, like they have to do the escape DC and all that.
Then succeed is one of the other changes here too. Because before, so here's a change in the grappler's favor. Before, when you went to grapple someone, it was a contested roll, like we've talked about. Here, if you go to grapple someone and you succeed on a hit, so you're just going for their AC, they're not opposing it. You grapple them. If you hit with an unarmed, quote-unquote, grapple attack, they are grappled.
Yeah.
And then they can't escape the grapple until the end of their next turn.
That's interesting.
They just are if you hit with the attack.
And the same thing with the shove. It's no longer a contested check. It is now, do I hit your armor with my shove attack? If I did, you are shoved, no questions asked.
It definitely, streamlines. It takes away the, contested rules, which are always kind of a weird standout in 5th edition. They're only in very niche circumstances. Now they don't exist anymore, more or less. Like, it's just, you're going to make a roll, and it's either going to succeed or fail. All right. The final part of this document is the spell lists, which I'm not going to read. How dare you ask me to, Traveler?
Click on the link in the description. Read it yourself.
Very rude of you. But there are now 3 main spell lists in the game: Arcane, Divine, and Primal. In future Unearthed Arcana articles, we'll show how classes use these lists and how a class or subclass might gain spells from another list. The lists here go through first levels to support some of the races and feats in this document. The list currently includes spells only from the 2014 Player's Handbook, hinting that they might add maybe some new ones.
Well, that also means that it doesn't include, like, Xanathar spells.
True, but I'm just saying it also implies there might be new spells in the new Player's Handbook. We
maybe
don't know.
to balance out these 3 different
They
lists.
might take some of the spells that previously were in Xanathar's Guide or Tasha's Everything and put them in the new Player's Handbook to be a handbook spell. So the only real interesting thing to note currently is that there's one spell on these lists that is notably absent from where you'd assume it should be, which is Eldritch Blast, a warlock's best friend.
What?
I think what they're doing is they're nerfing warlocks. Eldritch Blast has been cut from the game. No more Eldritch Blast for warlocks.
No more warlocks.
They've had it too good for too long.
To be honest, yes.
Well,
but
or is it most likely going to be only a thing that warlocks have access to? Like, maybe it's just a class.
It's a class ability.
It's most
Very
likely
possible.
Yeah, we're assuming it will end up being in the warlocks class features somehow. There will be a comparative use something ability.
For that reason, I am surprised that Hunter's Mark is on this list, because it seems like that was the direction they've been moving with that as well, was making that more of a ranger ability.
I think they keep trying to make it a ranger ability, and everybody else keeps saying, not interested.
I think it does work as a ranger
It's
ability.
interesting. We'll have to see.
It works as a ranger ability, but
interested
nobody wants it.
to see how they adjust rangers in this, because it is the Sisyphean task of 5th edition to try and fix the ranger. They've already done it 3 or 4 times. We'll see how this new one goes.
I know.
You know.
It's so funny. I'm playing a ranger in one of our kind of long-term campaigns right now, and every time that I have to check a rules thing, I have to remember which version of the ranger I'm using for that part of my build.
It's very good.
Because it is literally mix and match.
Yeah, it
for
absolutely
Tasha's.
is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's seeming like maybe there are certain abilities that we're going, what? But with rogues and their sneak attack and warlocks and Eldritch Blast, and maybe their plan is just that certain classes are going to have their abilities listed, like, within their class. Like, rogues, it'll specifically say, you get to add your sneak attack damage to your crits. And, like, warlocks are like, you get Eldritch Blast, but we'll have to wait.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens.
So we will withhold some of our pearl clutching until we know how they're actually accounting for things that seem confusingly absent.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to see how it goes. But next time on our Unearthed Arcana Deep Delve, we'll be covering feats. There's a bunch of first level feats included in this document, and that will be our next episode. Hopefully it'll be a little tighter, a little shorter. There's less of them than there were rules clarifications. But what's a first level feat, you might ask? Feats don't have levels. Just you wait.
How exciting.
And with that, I believe we have made it out of the dungeon and finished this Unearthed Arcana Deep Delve. Thanks for listening to us, travelers. If you enjoyed the episode, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Send it around to your friends. Compare notes on what you think about our takes. Were we right? Were we wrong? Are we bad at D&D and should retire?
Leave a comment below.
Probably. Yeah, we should. Tell us your thoughts in the comment section below. If you have homebrew you'd like us to cover on the channel, you can send it to us at our email, thecopperfoxinn@gmail.com, or on social media at thecopperfoxinn. And with that, the episode is over, and everybody's leveled up.
Oh, nice.
Oh, wow.
Whoa!
Dang.
Yeah.
I can get angry more times per day.
Thanks for listening, travelers. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
All right, we
Keep
made
on
it to the
adventuring.
made it to the next part of the dungeon, and there's a door here, so it's probably going to take us about 2 hours.
This door just
No,
says
it's-
feet.
it's-
Everyone take
guys.
your shoes off.
It's unlocked.
Oh. Is that how you open a door this whole time? Man, I've been seducing them.
All right.